Today we're going to be looking at some interesting things found in Moscow, and we'll be going through everything in detail. The first place we will visit is the Triumphal Arch. Here we see a picture of a typical warrior of the War of 1812. A European-looking man armed with a spear and shield. On his head is an interesting helmet. The most interesting thing, however, is his armor. Look at this. He's wearing very thin armor, or a very thin skin through which all the muscles comfortably protrude. Or perhaps it's metal armor that mimics the human body. The following is an interesting picture that tells us about the War of 1812. Here we see someone like Caesar of Rome talking to lightly dressed women. One of the women holds a shield. Probably a military council between different branches of the troops is being depicted here. In the background we see the military architects who brought Caesar a sketch of his camping tent. All characters are very lightly dressed. It's possible that the War of 1812 took place in a country with a warm climate. Let's move on to the next sculpture. Here it just shows a woman from the Aviation Battalion. Looks like she's a scout. This picture shows the entire arsenal of weapons that were used in combat. Here we can see shields bound with sprigs. What a strange shield! An upside down urn and some balls. Thanks to the architect of the Triumphal Arch, even an uneducated person understands the climate in which the War of 1812 took place, what weapons were used and what troops were involved. Some researchers believed the architect did well. He described the weapons of the War of 1812 so well that even in 100 years, anyone will understand everything about the events of the war. Here's another interesting sculpture. Perhaps the actuator of this snail mechanism. See how well this interesting mechanism is depicted. Here is an interesting inscription which follows that some Gauls destroyed Moscow and brought with them 20 languages. It's now evident that the advancing Gaulish troops spoke 20 individual languages. It's clear from these compositions that pineapple leaves were highly valued in Moscow. The mechanical armor with a complete imitation of the human body is clearly visible so that any lizard could control this armor from the inside. And also, nobody would be able to distinguish it from the humans. We also see representatives of a special kind of troops, the Rams Battalion. It's a pity that we only see the head of rams. It's very interesting. What kind of armor they wore. Also, representatives of the cavalry seem very close to the order of rams. Look at the ram's head adorning the chariot. Alright, the architect of the Triumphal Arch seems to have done a lot of research. Perhaps he sat in the archives and studied the military documents of the War of 1812. But now everything is clear. Who and with whom the fighting broke out in 1812. Now, here's the most interesting branch of the military in the War of 1812. Look at these one-eyed warriors. They look a bit like turtles. There's some kind of mollusk sitting on the helmet. It looks like they must have hooked their own hand through their gear linkage. They also worshipped gears. Perhaps this was what Gauls really looked like. Researchers found this to be an excellent architectural design and left them with zero questions about what really occurred in 1812. Perhaps we now know what the Gauls really looked like. Now we'll move on to another location. Here we are on Borodinsky Bridge. Here's another war memorial of 1812. As we see, again, the weapons and helmets of those years are very well depicted. The main weapon of that war was well represented in a set of rods with an axe handle. It may be very dangerous. It's portrayed everywhere. As we can see, the architect of this monument is a completely different person, but he didn't stray from history. All weapons are depicted in exactly the same way as in the triumphal arch. Here we see the representatives of the Ram Battalion again. And automatic armor with imitation of the human body. We also see bowling balls. Perhaps in those days it was a fashionable game. It can be seen that the architects who created the Triumphal Arch and Borodinsky Bridge studied from the same textbooks. Look at how detailed they are about the weapons of 1812. Most importantly, they don't contradict each other. Now we'll move on to another place. Here we're at Chistyye Prudy, Sorency Boulevard Street. Now, I'll show you an interesting mansion. Look at this building. It looks quite unusual. We'll look at the walls of its high manifestation. The building is located at this address. Frolov Lane, Building 01. This is an interesting turret clock. This is a lion holding a dynamo sign. Here's a not colourful pelican. Here we also see some winged creatures. And another interesting beast. And finally, the image of the devil on the walls of the mansion. You can find very interesting monsters on the walls there.